Here we go. You know what's going down, right? Like that.
We're excited to bring you another season of Industry Sessions where we connect our communities to the music industry to discuss careers and trends. We are kicking off the spring season with a month dedicating to knowing your worth, both personally and professionally. And what better way to get started than with today's topic? We're so excited to have today's professionals here to talk about wellness and music. Before we get today's conversation started and really talk about what the topic is, I want you all just to tell our audience a little bit about yourselves, who you are, the company or organization that you represent, and sort of what brings you to the conversation. Chris, we'll start with you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Smith, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker with the Actors Fund in Los Angeles. The Actors Fund is a national nonprofit that provides supportive services to people in the entertainment industry. And I manage a program called Looking Ahead, which is the only program of its kind that supports the social and emotional needs of children in the entertainment industry. So child actors, child performers, child entertainers, and I handle the mental health services with the organization. So pleased to be here with you all.
Thank you. Harold?
Hey everyone, good to be here. I'm Harold Owens. I'm Senior Director at MusiCares. We are an organization quite like Chris. In fact, Chris's organization, the Actors Fund, has been around so long. We, in many ways, model our program on what you guys have done. Kudos to you, Chris. My talent has been working with artists who are suffering from addiction and mental health illness. I really have used my own experience. I'm in recovery to get an ear when someone calls and they don't have an idea of what sobriety is or where to go. We provide a financial assistance to providers across the country who give us great discounted rates. And so we're able to do that, and we do a lot of other things, hearing prevention, you name it. But my specific program is addiction and mental health. So,
Thank you. And last but not least, Kristelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with Harold and Chris. I'm Kristelle Aisaka. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm currently a senior campus advisor and data lead at the JED Foundation, working to promote emotional health and prevent suicide and high-risk substance use for our nation's teens and young adults. So in my role specifically, I support strategic planning initiatives at colleges and universities across the country. You can certainly learn more about what we do at jedfoundation.org is our website. Separate from my role at JED, at least when it's not a global pandemic, I also do health, wellness, and harm reduction work for attendees at music events and festivals across the country, primarily large-scale dance music events.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing, and thank you for being here. Just to sort of give background on why we decided to present wellness and music as our first industry session is that last year was a lot. Last year was a lot. January was a lot. It is a lot. And now we're into February. But we talk about the music industry. We talk about the different careers within it and being successful. And we don't often always associate how sort of daunting the industry is, or how just sort of taxing it could be on not only our bodies as artists and performers, but also our minds as people who are in the industry, whether you're on stage or off. And so we really wanted to set ourselves up before even introducing industry sessions for 2021, where what are the best practices to sort of keep myself sane, not only in the industry, but in a pandemic, but also just in the world in general. And we found that you are the three people to let us know what's up. So I'm happy to have you here. I want to start this conversation with just some of what are the misconceptions about sort of mental health, whether related to music or acting or entertainment. Sort of what are some of the myths that you'd like to sort of address today before we start unpacking other things in the conversation? Kristelle, we'll start with you.
Yeah, there are a lot. Maybe I'll start more broadly, and then Chris and Harold, feel free to jump in too if you have thoughts about sort of more music industry specific things. I think just the idea that, we have to be productive in order to be valuable, or that we have to be, producing a certain level or a certain quality or a certain kind of work in order to add value to society, I think is really stressful. I think when we think about everything that's going on in COVID, we have, what has been a really stressful emotional time for folks that are in the music industry or in music adjacent careers. there's been a vast number of financial, family, social pressures on top of what's already an emotional stress. And so our support systems look totally different. We're challenged to find new ways to cope. I think there are a lot of, I guess, misconceptions about what that coping should or shouldn't look like, or who our supports should or shouldn't be. When in reality, we're all just trying to make it, right? And so thinking about sort of who are the people and what are the ways that we can stay healthy during this time, I think is something that we can really focus on.
Yeah. Chris, for you, I mean, same question, but I'm curious of what are some of the things that you see popping up in your work as you work directly with child or young actors? And as we have a lot of young artists on this call, sort of what some things that you see popping up and reoccurring in your role?
Yeah, you know, and I really appreciate what Kristelle said about the standards and feeling like we need to be so productive.
Yeah.
When I look at 2020, you know, everybody was baking bread, everybody was getting all ripped and, you know, trying to be all muscular during the pandemic or learn another language. But really, I look at like now in January 2021, the goal is survival. This is like The Walking Dead. And if you can just be healthy and just take care of yourself through the pandemic, then you won. So I want to really kind of like set expectations for everybody, just like Kristelle said, that like we don't necessarily need to learn another language or come up with 10 songs if we're a musician. It's really just managing. But as far as some of the issues that I'm seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of loneliness, and you know, I was kind of reflecting on this a couple of weeks ago. I was with some people who were just sharing how the pandemic has impacted them. And I was really struck by the fact that I don't think most of us really have an opportunity to talk about how challenging this past year has been.
Right.
No one is unscathed. No one is without blemish. So I think like this panel is great to really just put it out there that like, let's check in on how you're doing. So anxiety, loneliness, depression are common.
Yeah. I think that a couple of things to what you say is, one is we're as a society not always creating space to talk about what's happening to us and our emotions, but also I don't want to say no one, but there aren't really opportunities for us to be taught how to communicate our emotions, right? And so I think that that's also something to take away from this call too, is when you're feeling something, there are certain ways and practices that you can communicate those emotions and create that space. So thank you for bringing that up. Harold, same question, sort of what are you seeing in your work as reoccurring as related to mental health and physical health?
Well, what I see a lot, and you guys are great. I really couldn't say any more. I think the stigma of mental health is a big, that we have to, you know, get past and do a lot of outreach in that. Everybody has been depressed. What I see is how drugs and alcohol in this time of, you know, isolation, people are dying of depression and addiction. It's tied in. You know, there's a difference between someone who has real mental health issues and that are kind of biological, and people suffer from addiction. But what happens with addiction, it totally mimics what happens in, you know, in mental health and the way the brain functions. So, you know, I got a kid who's been up 3 days on meth. Well, he's hearing voices and he's paranoid and he thinks he's going crazy. And, you know, there's a big difference that we have to assess. Isolation is it can be productive, you know. Great works have been produced in isolation. Nelson Mandela is a great example. And then how you deal, the coping strategies that you use during this time are very important. I like to focus on that a lot. And how are you dealing with this? And you can go one way, you can self-medicate, or you can, you know, join a support group and talk about it with this format. Zoom has been great, I think. For addressing some of that isolation. It's been, for me personally, it's been wonderful. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that makes me think of, Harold, I think especially now that we're in so many cities, our physical distancing or social distancing, kind of how we interact with people looks so different, that substance use or kind of keying into when someone might have an addiction or substance use problem looks really different too, right? Because all we're seeing from someone might be, oh, look at this banana bread I baked, like Chris said, or, oh, look at all the time I'm spending in the studio. But we might not necessarily see, you know, the substance use or other struggles that someone's having behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah, I mean, since we're on sort of the topic of substance abuse, I really want to talk about really the link and the connection that you all feel between wellness and creativity. It's not unheard of that artists are taking substance and begin to abuse substance because they want to put out a new album, or they're going on tour or they need to stay up, and that's with energy. And so talk to us about, and Kristelle, we'll start with you, talk to us about sort of what is that connection between wellness and creativity, and how do you balance it?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a feedback loop, right? We know that, and that's true for both mental wellness and for physical wellness. Some of our inspiration often comes from those really difficult moments or experiences, but a lot of that inspiration can also come from how do we process that? How do we sort through those thoughts or feelings? How do we bounce them off of people we trust? So being creative contributes to how we can stay mentally well or physically well, but we also know that staying mentally and physically well allows us to be our most creative selves and most productive selves as well. So I think it's certainly a challenge, and that applies to both mental health concerns and substance use issues as well. And we see that across the board.
Cool. Harold, how about you?
No, I agree. I think that so many artists that I see, I've seen arcs of careers, okay? I have seen artists over like 30 years who I've worked with. When they were coming in, they were addicted, and I've seen them progressively, you know, they bought the myth, and essentially is what, from my generation, you know, the myth about creativity and addiction, that we see so many artists who are at the top of their careers die. And that's a myth, and really have to dispel that, because creativity, you know, addiction has an arc to it as well.
Yeah.
You feel like you're being creative, but you reach a top threshold, and it starts eating itself. You lose creativity. I like to say, I've heard a lot of artists say, I could hear the music when I was getting loaded, but I couldn't feel it anymore. I couldn't play. And they get sober, and it's like, wow, you know, this thing comes back, this magic comes back. But once you cross that line, it's hard getting back. So one of the things.
I'm interested to hear from you, Chris. Do you feel like the music industry is doing enough to encourage wellness for both artists and industry professionals and actors, or do you feel like they encourage some of this behavior to create that product and be able to churn out, whether it's music, movies, or anything to make money?
Well, you know, I think there's definitely steps. Like I look at, you know, all three of us who are on here, the panelists, like we're a step in those positive directions. But I just think as a society, we're not doing enough to really tackle mental health and emotions. And for me, I wish that we taught more about how to manage our emotions and really sit with our emotions. So just large scale, we could really step into that conversation more. And, you know, I have to find myself telling young people, it's okay to be angry, and you have a right to your emotions. You have a right to be angry. You have a right to feel aggrieved about something. Now let's talk about some ways that we can channel this emotion and to learn how to sit with it. But I think, like, by and large, all industries, the music industry, the entertainment industry, acting, can do more to support members. And part of it's our programs, part of it's continuing to carry on the conversation and really just normalize the emotional aspect of every part of life.
Yeah, I'm curious because there is this, I don't think that young people are taught enough about boundaries. And one, I'm projecting, but two, also, I don't think that young people are taught enough about boundaries, because that's really where protecting your own mental health and physical health come in, is setting boundaries. But it's not really something that's taught to you as a young person, because you have responsibilities, school, college, music class, acting class, whatever. It's something that you do because someone's telling you to do it, right? And so how can a young person set boundaries? And if you have any examples, please share.
Well, I think that, you get sucked in as a kid to, you see a group of kids here and they are on their way of being very self-destructive. And there's a choice that you have to make. I think coming up today is a lot more difficult in terms of boundaries because of social media and what happens on social media. And this is, this is a big, it's kind of sad in a way that human interaction has just, especially today, just fractionalized.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear from Chris because she works.
Same.
Well, I think like starting with the point that no is a complete sentence. And if we say no to someone, that doesn't mean that we need to give an explanation or that we need to like go back and forth. If I say no, then that means no. And then also I want to encourage people, especially young people, and this is what I do a lot in my work, is to really check in with themselves and ask what are their needs in a situation? What are their needs for safety? What are their physical and emotional needs? And then really ask themselves when they're going in situations, where am I putting my needs in relation to this other person? Am I putting their needs above mine or mine above theirs? And it is okay to put others before ourselves. Is definitely okay, but as long as we do that consciously and mindfully, and not just because we have a hard time saying no. But everybody needs to learn how to say no.
Harold, how do you balance your knowing your needs but also wanting success? That's basically the conversation of the industry, right? I want to be successful, and so I'm going to push myself because that's what everyone says, right? Hard work gets the job done. You got to keep going, never give up. Like, no, I never sleep. Like that sort of, everyone is spinning that rhetoric because that's what gets results. How do I balance wanting to be successful?
I think, good question. I think that you have to take it one step at a time.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person that when I was going to college, I wanted to be an attorney, and I just saw that. And then I started looking at the steps it took to do that. I think you have to do, it's very simple, that one day at a time thing, and taking things as they come. And, gradually as you focus on that is a great discipline, because you can still have that goal and dream and accomplish it, but it is incremental, and so you got to pay your dues as well.
Yeah. I want to break this down even further, because again, we're talking about multiple constituents dealing with wellness in the music industry, right? We've sort of talked about young people, we talked about college students, and we even talked about young actors, right? But I want to talk about the disparities between gender and ethnicities as it relates to the stigma around mental health, and even just the resources that are afforded to them. Kristelle, we'll start with you, and the specific question being, are there unique challenges or aspects around gender and ethnicity that make it difficult to drive the conversation about mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of different factors around identity broadly, right? For anyone who exists in the world and operates in spaces we operate in, that complicates mental health. That might be the conversations that you had growing up with your family. That might be, your gender identity. I have many friends who were socialized as male, who have a really hard time talking about feelings and emotions, and that just wasn't a part of their vocabulary. We know that there are certain race and ethnicity identities that mental health isn't talked about as much, that it even manifests very differently physically when you're having mental health concerns or struggles. And so I think it's really important for us not just to talk about mental health and wellness overall, but also how it might look really different from person to person, and the kinds of language that people use, either to talk about how they're struggling or to explain, I guess, what's physically or emotionally happening in their body.
Yeah. Before, I want to hear from Harold and Chris on that same question, but before I ask them that, Kristelle, you mentioned sort of the ways we speak about it. And so I just wanted to know if you can provide some examples to our audience and some phrases to use when communicating.
Yeah, so do you mean in terms of how someone might explain that they're stressed, or how to connect with somebody who is stressed?
I think both, but the former being the most important here.
Yeah, so it's certainly just looking at sort of patterns of behavior and action, right? So for example, if you're thinking about how do I know when a friend is struggling, then you might say like, hey, I noticed you've been showing up late to all of our rehearsals, or hey, I noticed that you've been making different kinds of posts on social media. For yourself, and communicating that it might be, hey, I'm having a really hard time right now, or it might be, hey, can we talk, right? It doesn't even need to be a, hello, friend, I am having a mental health struggle and I would like to talk to you about it. It might just be like, hey, I'm feeling off today, right? And opening that conversation in a language that you know makes sense for whoever it is that you're talking to.
Thank you. Chris, sort of back to the question about the unique challenge and aspects around gender ethnicity and the difficulties in driving the conversations in both of those spaces. What has been your experience, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my experience, like as a Black male therapist, licensed clinical social worker, I feel like we're just a small minority. And oftentimes I find people are really seeking out Black clinicians and just clinicians of color. And when I look at the events that have happened over the past year, like people need a space to process this. The trauma of racism is real, and it affects everyone. And I feel that like sometimes people of color don't have a space to really talk about that. But also with that, sometimes I think in some people of color groups, there could be the sense that like talking about our issues, like we don't want to let this outside of the family, or like therapy is something for white people. And we really need to dispel those myths. Like mental health and mental wellness is like just as valuable as physical health and wellness. So there need to be resources for that.
I think, go ahead, Harold.
No, I agree. I just wanted to add, I think for people that work in the field we work in, being culturally competent is very important. Getting the training. I thought I knew everything until we started doing the trainings. And it was such refreshing, because we deal with all cultures. You know, how do I talk to someone in Asian communities who might be very, withdrawn, and how do you speak? How do you talk to someone if you're from another culture that you have no idea? You might be offending. We found out even in our applications sometimes that African Americans had a harder time, and they questioned some of the questions that we had. So we went back and changed it. So it starts with the agency. I think it's very important, to have training.
Can I jump in also? And like going back to a point that Kristelle said, which I really appreciate, of being able to go to a friend and, hey, I'm off today. And the way I describe it is like, sometimes you have 44% that day, and like, it's okay to show up at 44%, and that's where you're at. But also for people to really get the sense that like, if you go and share that with a friend that you're off, and that friend does not maybe respond in the way that is the most helpful, I ask that you continue reaching out to people, because it can be very easy to say, I reached out to this person or to the suicide hotline and they didn't answer, or this person didn't respond. So then forget it. I'm throwing my hands up. Like what I want everybody to know, all the panelists, all the people who are listening, is that there is a lot of compassion in this world. And if you don't find it with the first person, like there is a lot of compassion, and you'd be surprised how many people can see you as a human and be compassionate.
Yeah, it's really important to understand too that you going to a friend and that person not being receptive or getting you the reaction that you may have wanted, like that person, it's not that they don't love you or don't care about you. They might not have the proper skill set to be able to have that conversation. And while that is with reality and might not work for you right in that moment, it's something that's just true. Not everyone is afforded the same education or the same resources. So it's not, oh, you're not being a good friend. It's, you're not the friend I need right now. Let me find what I need somewhere else. I think that's important. And I mean, if all of our friends could help us with our mental health, we wouldn't have therapists, right? There wouldn't be a paid gig for it. Chris, you brought up something that was very interested to me about sort of it's okay to show up at 44%. And I'd love to continue this conversation because we're talking about this in regards to talking to a friend, right? Showing up to a gathering, a dinner, or hanging out or whatever. And it's okay to show up at 44%. But I want to continue the conversation in terms of when you're working and when you're in that internship and when you're in that job and you're working that 9 to 5, the sort of stigma is that you give it your all, you give it your 100%. So how can I show up to my job that I'm getting paid for at 44% and communicate to my boss that, like, I'm not all here today, right? Is that something that is acceptable? How do you do that in the professional space?
You know, and that's such a great question, DeMarco. And I think, to be honest, it really depends on your agency, the culture that's set up. For me, I've supervised people, and I've appreciated when people have shared with me what's going on. Like, I want people to be comfortable that I supervise. So sometimes if people say, you know, I'm having this issue going on in my life, that's okay to bring to me. But I can't guarantee that every person will be receptive. But I think the more person feels emotionally safe and seen and valued, and we pour into people, the more that people will feel like, okay, like I can share this with you, and I want to show up even more because you were able to hold my vulnerability and meet me when I was kind of at my low point. So I want to work harder. And I found that people who've shared their mental health struggles have been appreciative. So that's really a case-by-case basis on your organization and how comfortable you feel expressing that vulnerability.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone else has anything to add to that question. Great.
Just a thought. We work with a number of artists through our Jed Voices program, where artists will kind of have conversations, recorded conversations, and we'll release videos about them talking about mental health or that sort of thing. And one of the folks that was recently on Jed Voices, Elohim, has been very vocal about her own struggles with mental health. And certainly she tells her own story much better than I do. But one of the things she talks about is how the first time her tour manager saw her go through a panic attack and sort of what the process was like of like seeing her triggers, and her tour manager had even made a comment of like, that's the first time I've seen anyone go through that. Now I see it so differently. And so also thinking about, just like we were saying previously, that, you know, even though not everyone comes to us equipped to be the perfect helper, but there's a learning opportunity in it for so many people too. And just because they can't help you right now doesn't mean they can't be helpful.
Yeah. Go ahead, Harold.
No, I just wanted to add, I find myself in terms of management and for families, it's sometimes a task to teach them about mental health and or addiction, and you have to educate them to have that kind of compassionate view, because see, they're reacting to a lot of grief, pain, you know, let down, and they are angry. So, you know, part of my job is working with management and families to kind of give them an education on what does major depression or bipolar disorder look like, or addiction on the artist. What is this person feeling? Because, you know, 9 times out of 10, they're not happy campers and they are suffering.
Yeah.
So, you know.
We, Kristelle, and I think both Harold and Chris, you mentioned this earlier too, but how just even the past year has caused a lot of just anxiety for everyone, right? And I think something that I know about anxiety is that it sort of can come in any shape and form, and it can be very much also most often comes unexpectedly, right? And sometimes it takes the form of affecting your body physically or affecting you mentally. Kristelle, because you talked about panic attacks, can you share with us some advice to what to do when you yourself is having a panic attack? And then also, what is the best thing to do when someone else is having a panic attack?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is sort of trial and error, right? I think anyone with anxiety, we kind of figure that out.
Yeah.
For me, what's really helpful is breathing exercises. So doing, like, taking a moment and just taking a deep breath. It's very often that even when we're just sitting at our desks, like the way I'm sitting right now, I'm sort of leaned over, I'm crushing my diaphragm. It makes you feel nervous. And so taking that deep breath, taking a pause can be really helpful. Knowing that supportive person you can talk to, or if you have a pet, like petting your pet, right? All of those things I think are really valuable. Just finding an activity or something that can help you just feel grounded. I've had folks that said, you know, sometimes just going outside and putting my toes in the grass helps.
Yeah.
Talking to a mental health professional, if you have one, that's really helpful. Just kind of, I don't know, there are so many things, and a lot of times it's just trying out a lot of different things to figure out what works for you. I think in terms of helping someone who might be going through a really high anxiety time or a panic attack is really just asking them what works for them, right? I have a friend who is amazing, and anytime I'm freaking out, I'll call him and he'll start helping, and then he'll say, is what I'm doing helping, right? Checking in and saying, hey, is this what you actually need right now? Do you want advice, or do you want empathy, or do you want, you know, suggestions? What can be helpful to you? Do you want me to just sit here and I won't say anything? And so kind of giving those options to someone oftentimes can be really helpful too.
Yeah, I think you bring up such an important point where, like, you have to be able to communicate what you need, right? Even when you're just like, hey, Chris, I want to talk, but I only want you to listen. I'm not in the space to receive feedback right now, because, you know, you get angry, you're charged, I just want to vent. And you want that space. And then allowing Chris to say, I can create that space for you, or I can't. But no one's going to know that unless you communicate what your needs are. So thank you for sharing that. I want to take some questions from the audience that we're getting. Harold, I'll ask you this question specifically, and it comes from Gabriel. And it's really about how can we support musicians, touring musicians specifically, without health insurance? Like, what are sort of the resources that musicians are afforded to take care of their mental health when really health insurance isn't a thing because it's not a traditional 9 to 5?
Well, and that's why we're here. I mean, the Actors Fund also helps musicians, and MusiCares. We approved probably 98.5% of our applicants because of, you know, as long as they show they've been working for a few years, we're good with that. And we then will go and find the appropriate therapist or facility. They don't, you know, most working, especially the touring industry, they don't have insurance, you know, and we're talking about just plain, you know, guys that build sets or lighting or, you know, stagehands, engineers. So we're not just talking about artists, you know, we're not talking about the creatives. So that's, I want you to know that. Just go on our website, musicares.org, and it will, you know, it's all there in the application online.
Yeah, you know, and just to hop on that too, I just want everybody to know, like, musicians, traveling musicians in this case, you're not alone. Like, really, there are services out there to help folks. And like Harold said, MusiCares, the Actors Fund, we see people without insurance all the time, and we're used to supporting people through those things. So just know you're not alone and that there are resources to help you.
Yeah.
And then also 211, everyone. 211 is a great resource in your community. 211 is a resource hub for social service support in your community. So you just call 211 like you would 411 or 911, or go on 211.org, just Google it, and then you could find those resources in your community.
Yeah.
Well, Bertha, are you up to that, Chris?
What's that?
Great website called Big Bertha, I think.
Oh, okay. Look at this, finding more resources. I'll have to check that out.
There's a ton out there, DeMarco.
Yeah. Make sure that
it's on our website.
That you're mentioning. Please chat them in the chat so that our participants have them. I'm curious because we talked about. I'm also going to stop saying that, but I start every sentence with "I'm curious." I'm interested in sort of talking about emotional intelligence, because we talk about sort of protecting ourselves and knowing how to sort of address our own emotions and our own mental and physical health. But I think emotional intelligence really speaks to creating spaces for other people. So how, as an individual, as a young person, can I help to increase my EI? And Kristelle, I'm curious to hear what you have to say here.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is practice and finding the people that kind of are able to have those conversations, right? Knowing the folks that you can go to when you need to process sort of a difficult experience or a difficult emotion, knowing the people who are supportive of all of your sort of self-care mechanisms or boundary setting or goal setting or whatever that might look like. finding mentors and advisors who can help you in that space as well, and just doing a lot of personal work too.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, Harold, is how do you, as someone who's working in the space, protect your own energy? You're taking in so many stories, you're taking on so many emotions. How do you protect your own energy?
Yes, we are vulnerable, those of us who do this work. I see people die all the time, that some of my clients that, every year, and it goes up. So I have a really strong support system of some folks I talk to 4 or 5 times a week on Zoom. I have, an AA meeting on Zoom. I do family on Saturdays. I've got a small group of men who get together and talk it out, and we don't hold back. And that's been the great silver lining of this pandemic, is that I've got some new friends and a new way to express what's going on inside of me, because we're all vulnerable. I was suicidal when I got here. 32 years ago, I was in my car actively contemplating suicide. So, it takes a lot of work, but again, if you're overwhelmed with what's going on with you, take it one thing at a time. There's plenty of books. And I like what Kristelle said about the resources.
Yeah. And I also think that there's this pressure to sort of complete everything in a certain time frame. Do it before you're 21, do it before you're 30, right? And specifically when you're an artist too, you're like, I want to be young and famous and I want to have this happen now. Time is here, right? And you can sort of take a break and still come back. The industry will always be here in whatever shape or form it might be in. But if you need to sort of take a step back and take care of yourself, I feel like that is more important than trying to sort of stay relevant. With that statement, I'm curious, Chris, what you think about artists and actors who share their mental health journey on social media. Are you for it? Are you against it? Do you encourage it? I've seen it help a lot of people, and I've seen it also destroy a person's brand and career. What are your thoughts there?
Well, first, let me just say, like, when I was young, I felt like 27 was the age that I had to have my life together. I don't know where I came up with that, but I felt like I needed to be married and like have kids and be in my career at 27.
Okay.
And I didn't know anything about the world when I was 27. But now looking past that, I realized like it was completely okay. Like it happened in its own time. But for younger people who are kind of deciding whether to share their mental health, it really depends on how they're sharing it. Like, I think that's a very personal decision on like the type of exposure that they want. I think of Kid Cudi, somebody who's talked a lot about mental health, how something like that could be very helpful. Andre 3000 as well. Yeah. But yet I think if people are talking about like suicide methods or being very graphic, I think that's not helpful. So it's really all in the way that a person chooses to do this.
Yeah. Small Kid Cudi plug. If you're looking to relax, his song "Dance for Eternity" will get you there. So just a plug there. But I also, something what you said, Chris, that made me think that you set your own goals and you are on your own journey, right? And so many times we are a lot of mental, I don't want to say it stems from this, but I think a huge component of it is comparing yourself to other people and to other people's accomplishments. You are on your own journey and on your own path, and what success looks like for you might be different. And so I think something that was in the chat was, how can we redefine success so that we are protecting our mental health and our physical health?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to understand what your values are. But, for me, I kind of, I wanted things for myself, but it wasn't so much career. I kind of relied on my own talents. I like to read. I think finding your talents in what you love, what you would love, and pursue it. I think that's one thing I would strongly say. And discover who you are first. And like Chris said, I was 36 when I began a career, and so there's always time. I think reading and pursuing the path you want to go. You know, it's nobody else's, it's yours.
Yeah. Chris, I'm curious, we're going to take some questions from participants in a few minutes. I'm curious, have you seen sort of changes in specifically in the Black community as it relates to talking about mental health or going out and finding resources to service them?
I have, you know, just like growing up, everything was like, take it to the Lord.
Yeah.
Or just pray about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think I appreciate that, and that's very helpful. But I think also another way to think is like, if you are taking it to the Lord, well, maybe there's people here who can be that physical embodiment of that.
Yeah.
So I have seen those changes, and then with the younger generation, I'm very hopeful for the younger generation, and maybe part of it is because people are posting so much about mental health or talking about their mental health challenges, that the younger generation, like, some of those barriers and some of the shame is removed. So I think there's a lot of hope for that, and I have seen a lot of change in the Black community with that. But we still have a ways to go. And now, like, I think the community really needs to make sure that there's enough skilled mental health clinicians to be able to meet the needs. Yeah.
I also think it's important for those in our audience who are looking to even just pursue careers as artist managers or publishers, any part of like an artist team, that I think being cognizant of how these strategies that we're sharing and being able to use those with their artists, because oftentimes the artist is looking for that team to support them, and it's that team that sort of lets them down or sort of has a hidden agenda and doesn't put the artist's mental health first. And I think we see that a lot with some of the artists who end up overdosing, et cetera. And you hear the stories and it's like, well, his manager was sitting in the room next to him. And it's like, well, what were you doing? So just being cognizant of that I think we all have a responsibility to each other to help each other out. I'm going to take a question from one of our participants. Her name is Nalini, and so she's going to pop on screen and introduce herself, and she's going to ask a question. So Nalini, feel free to pop your screen on. It worked. Hi, Nalini. How are you?
Hi, everyone. How are you? I'm Nalini. I'm a program and data intern here at Music Forward, and I'm excited to be here. My first question is, if someone is currently facing mental or physical health issues, would you recommend that they find a routine?
Go ahead, Harold.
A structure really helps, but I kind of think that it should be seeking professional help and having structure. Those are very good ways and signs that you can help yourself. I found that myself, having a routine was very important. When you don't have a routine, then that affects you in many different ways. And during the pandemic, it's been tough because I used to get up and drive to work. You know, there's an old saying, when I got busy, I got better. And that to be pretty much true. And it doesn't matter the task. So I think being busy is a great way of combating some of this isolation and loneliness.
Yeah. I'm also curious about, and Kristelle, if you can help us out here, is a lot of times creativity is birthed in chaos, is what I hear. And again, I think also another point of projection. So someone who is chaotic and who thrives in chaos, what is sort of the first point to sort of bring structure to your life?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tough question. I'm also a person who very much enjoys chaos. So I get that struggle very much. I think it's understanding at what point kind of you go over that curve of like, this is contributing to my productivity versus this is taking away from what I'm able to do, right? I think Harold had mentioned it earlier, sort of in the context of sort of substance use as well, that yes, we can acknowledge that there might be certain benefits to our coping skills or our actions, but we also have to be able to acknowledge where does that boundary end, and where do we need to start saying this is no longer something that's serving me well. And so that might be kind of knowing for yourself, like, hey, if I stay up all night to finish a project, that's totally fine. But if I do that for a week straight, this is not something that's sustainable.
Right.
Or if you have friends that can call you out on that and say, hey, I noticed that you're doing this thing again. Are you okay?
Yeah.
And having those things in place can be really helpful.
Yeah, accountability. Lily, I understand you have another question for us.
I do. So if someone is wanting to pursue a career in this industry, how would they go about that process?
Ooh. Chris, I think this is a good part for a good space for you to start.
And pursue a career in the entertainment industry?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, first I would say hone your talent. Hone your talent. That's maybe the number one thing, instead of kind of focusing on like finding the agent or the manager or whatever. Like, hone your talent, practice, play gigs if you're a musician, if you are an actor, like do theater, practice doing monologues and really focus on that, like so that you want to be comfortable in your own instrument. And then from that, and you can look at other productions in the community. But I also like really want to focus on that. Like, while a person is like practicing the guitar or like learning their lines for acting, like learn how to deal with your finances, learn how to deal with your emotions. Like, and I go back to the line, like, what does it mean to have a full life? So you need to be able to take care of your finances. You need to be able to like deal with your emotions. And like, what good is it if a person, is the biggest entertainer in the world, but then they don't have relationships? So it's taking care of everything as you move forward.
Fair. Thank you so much, Nalini, for being. Oh, Harold, do you have something to add here?
Just, I would encourage you, I would encourage somebody to look at, there's a lot of different areas of employment in the creative community that don't necessarily mean that you have to act or play. And I would just say, find those. There's so many different areas that you can go into. And once you find that area, then, God, that's a goal for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Harold. Thank you, Nalini, so much for being here today. Cool. We're going to take a question from another participant who will be popping on the screen to ask you all a question. You all are giving such good feedback today. Thank you. I love it. Great. Hi, Sun. How are you?
Hey, hi guys. I'm Sun. I'm a long-term supporter of House of Blues Music Forward. My question is, are there any songs recently that resonate with you guys?
That's a good one. We'll start with Kristelle.
Putting me on the spot. Let me think. Okay, so I was just reading an interview by Porter Robinson about his new song and his upcoming album.
Yeah.
And one of the things he was talking about with Look at the Sky, which is his new song, was about how there are all these things in the world that might be fuel for despair, right? That might make us feel all these negative emotions. But part of taking meaningful action to deal with that despair or to work through those things is having the belief that things will get better. And so in this interview, he was talking about like, how do we nourish that hope? How do we nourish that belief? And how do we come out of that on the other side? Would definitely recommend looking into it, especially if you're a dance music fan.
Harold, how about you?
Not particularly, but I would like to say this. I think during this time of the pandemic, I think artists are going to be producing and writing some amazing work, genre changing. I don't know whatever you want to call it. I think we're in for an intensely creative period in the music world.
Yeah. Even just before you go, Chris, even just to add on to that, what I've seen is that even in this year, a lot of artists have taken the time to do what we're doing here and to talk about their emotions, to prioritize their mental health. And so we're getting a lot of songs that are coming from this very raw place. The song that comes to mind is that song Driver's License that has just like taken storm everywhere. But I feel like everyone's just tapping into their raw emotions. But Chris, a song that that you've been listening to get you through?
Man, son, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
Seriously. I'll go quick, okay? It's an album by William McDowell. He's a gospel singer. It's called The Cry. That whole thing helped me, especially right after George Floyd. But then individual songs, the song Champagne Coast by Blood Orange. I
I
think it's
love
maybe
Blood Orange.
that song. I think he's the closest thing to like modern day Prince. So I found
Yeah.
that song and just play it nonstop.
Interesting. That's a heavy statement, Chris.
I know it is. I realize that. I didn't say he is Prince.
Yeah, it's modern day. Cool. Well, son, did you have another question?
I was wondering if you guys had any like daily like healthy habits to incorporate, like breathing exercises.
Yeah. Harold, what do you have for us?
Off and on meditation. So, but I can't say that and not practice it every day. I find that when I do, my day just changes dramatically. And talk about anxiety, that's one of the ways that I think people can decrease their anxiety a lot. So
Yeah,
that would be one.
Okay. Well, thank you, son, so much for being here and asking your questions. We appreciate it. Cool. I'm curious, Harold, what is the actual trick to quieting your mind with so much going on in the world and your mind racing?
Yeah.
What is the actual trick to quiet
For
it?
meditation?
Yeah,
You know
I've
what?
tried it and it's not a thing. It's not a thing.
You got to be quiet. You got to let the chaos come in.
Mhm.
It's amazing what happens. The chaos comes in, the thoughts, the negative thoughts, and then you just got to just sit there and let them go until they're coming in a little slower. And the more you practice, you get to a place of like just nothingness. And that's an amazing way to I say it's like being on acid, it's pretty profound.
The euphoric state. We're going to take one more question from our resident social media. She has a title that I am just messing up right now, so I'm just going to bring her on screen. Phoebe, join us out here.
Hi. So I'm Phoebe. I am the industry session social producer, and I have only one question for you all, which is that, so trying to break into the entertainment industry obviously is really hard, and often you're hearing a lot more no's than you're hearing yeses. So what would you say to a person that needs help trying to deal with the disappointment and the rejection of trying to break into the industry?
Again, I would encourage them to look at what they do. And I would, again, encourage them to look at other avenues that are unexplored and they can be very creative ways of, expressing yourself.
Chris?
Phoebe, with that, I think to reframe the story, reframe the narrative, like it's so easy to go in there and say, oh, I bombed and I'm a loser or whatever, but to really reframe it and say, okay, like maybe that didn't go as well as I wanted, but I learned X, Y, Z. And really look at it as like, this is a step up and just a path. This is your journey. And I think as we talked about earlier, people take a long time, like journeys are different. So reframe that narrative.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Phoebe. And those for you in our audience, we're going to be asking questions on our story. And so if you want to be one of our participants who either ask a question on screen or get your question answered from social, please engage with us on Instagram at HOB Music Forward. We are coming to the end here. And so I want to end, and I'd love to end our industry session just with the last piece of advice. And since we're talking about wellness and music, really talking about sort of what is something that you want our young people to know and walk away from this conversation with. And Chris, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things that that you have value and your life has value. I wish I could see all of your faces, but I really want you to take that like your life has value, and then also forget the Joneses. We all want to keep up with the Joneses, forget the Joneses, value and honor your path in life. Only keep up with yourself.
Harold?
I would just say, keep your eyes on the prize and go for your dreams and persist and be good. And like Chris said, love yourself and you know your worth. It doesn't come from out there because you won't get it. So Keep your eyes on the prize.
Kristelle, last but not least, take us home.
I guess just surround yourself with good people. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it, and don't burn yourself out. Try to make something specific happen. We always say that you can't pour from an empty cup, and I think that's true no matter what industry you work in.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. I want to thank our audience for chiming in for our first industry session of 2021. Chris, Harold, Kristelle, thank you so much for not only creating the space, but also nurturing it for us and for our participants. I got a lot out of today, and I'm sure that our participants got a lot out as well. So I want to thank you all so much for being here. And please